G'day, I'm Pete, the Aussie Bush Cop. In 2012 I retired from the New South Wales Police Force and moved to King Island to become a homesteader, and I'd like to tell you some of my stories. Hello everybody, thanks so much for joining me again for some stories from my time up in the bush. This one definitely is set in the bush. We were approached one time by a member of the Rural Bushfire Service. He'd been up in a fixed-wing aeroplane dropping things called, they're like, I don't know what they're called, but they're things that actually start fires. They do this maybe in the winter time to do back burning. And they're shaped, they're about the size of a ping pong ball, I think he told me. And then when they hit the ground, there's some sort of chemical reaction and they catch fire. So that's what this man was doing. He wasn't the pilot, he was just the one throwing these things out. But what he saw from the air was a car deep in this forest. I mean, clearly there was a road into it, but I can tell you it was pretty rough. And so he came and saw us, because it was quite a nice car. And he came and saw us, and by the time he told us, it was pretty late in the day. I actually can remember now, it was around Anzac Day, so it was in April. And so the next day he came with my partner and we went out there, because there's no way in the world we would have found it without him going in there with us. So we went in there and we found this car, and the car was a fairly late model, I don't know if it was a Ford or a Holden, but a ute, and it was jacked up, but it was jacked up on its side. So the whole, let's just say it was the driver's side, maybe using two jacks, and it was jacked up at about a 45-degree angle. And whoever it was had either stolen the gearbox or the motor, I forget which. But clearly they were going to come back and take, the gearbox or the motor, whatever was left. We knew, so we would need a tow truck to recover the car. We need a tow truck, and it was reasonably late in the day by the time we found it and did what we had to do. And we knew that the commander wouldn't approve overtime for us to stay there all night and guard it. That just wasn't going to happen. So we organised to get a tow truck in there to meet us the next day, and we would escort the tow truck in there and recover the property. But what I did, as our protocol, I rang the owner of the car to tell, was a female, to tell her that we'd found the car. And at the time it seemed a little bit odd, but not, I didn't really know how odd it was, that she seemed surprised at where the car was and that we found it. Anyway, we went back there the next afternoon with the tow truck, only to discover or find the car had been set on fire. So then the penny dropped. Well, this wasn't a stolen car. This was what's known locally as an insurance job, because the insurance company, I'd also found out, had also paid out the owner of the car because it was insured comprehensively. So these people had stolen, in inverted commas, their own car, took it out there, and were then, recovering. I suppose if they'd already been paid out, they were stealing, because they didn't own it anymore, the gearbox and the engine. And my partner on that shift, he was a real car nut. In fact, he might have been a mechanic by trade, and he told me, because I had no idea, what the gearbox and motor was worth, and it was like thousands of dollars. So I then made contact with an insurance investigator and told him what had happened, and I really don't know whether the insurance investigator was able to make any progress in getting their money back. But I did make one inquiry with a farmer after we found this out, that it had been burnt out. They burn it out to destroy any DNA evidence, in case you don't know. that he did see a car driving in there, late that afternoon or even evening, but that was as much. He didn't see what kind of car, certainly no registration details. So we just had to leave it there. I was pretty annoyed that, that maybe we could have done something different, but none of us were going to stay there all night and guard it and not be paid for it, so that's just how we had to leave it. When you work, and even when I worked in Dubbo, which is a town of back then 40,000 plus people, in some ways it still retains the aspects of a country town, and especially when you're dealing with the nefarious side of town that we did. And one of the features I found, and it used to unsettle me, was that some people took pleasure in being able to tell their friends that they'd been in custody or been arrested. It seemed to be maybe their mark of becoming a man, that they'd been arrested. And that was, I could tell stories about that. But one of the ways that I remember that this happened, and this wasn't a young man at all, this was a bloke probably about 40, and he was a good-natured fellow. He used to live in a rough part of town, but he never once came under any attention in a negative way. He was just a good-natured fellow, and he was rather short. And one time when I was at a job in that part of town, and he was there, and he just was being friendly and saying hello, and I forget what he said to me, and I said, I won't say his real name, let's just call him John. I said, John, if I come to a job this part of town and I don't hear you, he said, I think I've gone deaf. And he was very excited and happy to hear that, and he said, he kept on saying, you're the man, and he wanted to shake hands with me, but he was so short, my hand was at about a 45-degree angle down. And I must admit, I've always felt a bit sorry for short men. You can't really do anything about it, can you? Anyway, there was this particular bloke, and by then I had transferred from Dubbo to a one-man station, but my sons had continued to live in Dubbo, and both my sons are big men. And we were walking through the main street of Dubbo one Saturday morning, and I had a son either side of me, and we're walking through the throng of people in the main street of Dubbo, and we were like Moses walking through the Red Sea, just parting the ways. They're my sons are pretty imposing looking fellas. Anyway, and there was a knot of nefarious types that went past us, and my friend John was one of them, and he wanted his friends to think that he'd been locked up, because what he said, and he said it clearly loud enough for me to hear, he said he locked me up once. I remember thinking, no, John, I haven't. That never happened. And that was just his way of maybe trying to give himself some street cred. And I just found that at the same time both amusing and a little bit tragic, that he had to do that to make himself to be somebody. Because the plain fact of the matter is, he is somebody, irregardless of how he thinks he fits into society. Simply being a human ensures that. Another time, this happened in Dubbo, and there was a siege. I think it might have been a siege that was happening, which of course necessitated police being there. And where it happened was there was a row of single-storey units, and I forget what the person of interest in the siege, but he must have been armed, I guess, as they always are. Probably wasn't a firearm, but he was armed to some degree. Maybe it was a firearm. I can't remember now. But we were all the police were all wearing their heavy ceramic-plated, bullet-resistant vests. They're a very obvious thing that police wear. I'm not talking about the thing what you see coppers wearing now, the vest where they carry handcuffs and gun magazines and the like. Not that. This is very heavy ceramic plated bullet resistant vests. I think they're designed to stop a 7.62 millimetre round. We're all wearing those when there was this lady who, I might say, if there was any stray rounds being discharged by a crook, she was not a small target, put it that way. And she's just out the front of her house, of her unit. I remember, I can still almost see her in my mind's eye. She had her arms folded and she's just looking up and down the street like she's on the set of a movie. Like this is the Dr. Phil show, or what's that old show, Jerry Springer. It's like she was on the set of one of those TV shows and there was no danger. And I thought, if I was her and I lived in that house and I saw coppers out the front, a lot of coppers, wearing those big vests and maybe guns out, I'd be inside my house, in the middle of my house, in the toilet, in the shower cubicle. I'd be hiding. And there she was out there looking around, and I had to bark at her. I roared at her, telling her to get inside. And sometimes you think, I marvel at just how I don't want to use the word dumb, but how unremarkable some people are. They're just, pretty dumb. Anyway, one last story for you was that when I worked in Dubbo, we, for some legal reason, we had to look after juvenile prisoners. And if a juvenile prisoner was appearing in court that day, the Juvenile Detention Centre, which is a few kilometres out of Dubbo, they would bring them in from their detention centre, and I think sometimes maybe even we had to do that. But this particular day, this juvenile was brought in and he was put into one of the cells. And the cell that he was housed in was a rather big cell, and it had a toilet in it. And so he was in there and he was waiting to go over to court. So, we have to check, because one of the police, their jobs is to check prisoners. There's someone always, once there's a prisoner, there's a prisoner in the police station, all the time. And so this prisoner had, initially what we thought had defecated himself, and then put that faeces in his hand and rubbed it all over the walls, like the concrete walls and the glass, the bulletproof Perspex glass, because there was a tremendous amount of it. And so we had to, of course, get him out. We had to extricate him from that. And so I went and got my big yellow police raincoat and pants, because I didn't want anyone's poo on me. So it was all over his hands. So we went in there, because then of course you'd have to be showered and prepared suitably to go to before Her Honour. And so we then I donned this raincoat, and I'm sure other police had done the same, and probably put gloves on, because he's just covered in the stuff. So when we opened up the big door and went in, and I've never been so glad to smell coffee in all my life. I enjoy coffee, but this particular day it smelled extra good, because what he'd done, and he'd secreted, maybe just in his pocket, sachets of coffee from the Juvenile Detention Centre. Then when he got to our cells, he opened up one of them, got water out of the toilet bowl and made, and I'm sure he knew, he thought, maybe he even said it was poo, I don't know, but quite clear that was his intention. So I charged him. It's called, there's a thing, if you're in the coppers you might know what I'm talking about, or you will know, which was called charged at court. So whatever he was going before His Honour on, he also went with a fresh charge, a very, very fresh charge of malicious damage. And in case you're wondering, well, what did he damage? one of the things you have to prove with malicious damage is that it required a cleaning action to bring it back to the standard that it was before. So simply spitting or certainly urinating inside a cell is malicious. So that's what I charged him with. And Her Honour was very, very displeased that he'd done that to us. Anyway, thanks for joining me again, and we'll see you next time.